They say blood is thicker than water, but in my family, blood is just a currency used to buy compliance, silence, and endless sacrifices for the golden child. My name is Maya. I am 29 years old, a senior financial analyst, a fiercely independent woman, and, as of last week, the person who sent her own parents and older brother to jail in a single, fell swoop. To understand the sheer, unadulterated audacity of what my family attempted to do to me, you have to understand the deeply toxic, horribly skewed dynamics that have defined my existence since the day I was born. For as long as I can remember, the sun, the moon, and the stars have revolved entirely around my older brother, Kyle. Kyle is currently 35 years old, though emotionally and financially, he has been permanently stunted at the age of 14. While I was the quiet, invisible daughter who was expected to earn straight A's, secure scholarships, and never ask for a single dime, Kyle was the precious boy who required endless coddling. He was the child who had potential, a phrase my mother wielded like a shield to deflect any and all criticism of his glaring inadequacies. While I was working part-time jobs at 16 to afford my own clothes and save for college, Kyle was 22, still living in his childhood bedroom, and convincing our parents to fund his startups. The startups. Over the past 15 years, I have watched my parents pour tens of thousands of dollars into Kyle's ridiculous schemes. There was the custom skateboard grip tape business that resulted in boxes of unsellable inventory rotting in our parents' garage. There was the app he was supposedly developing that required a $3,000 gaming laptop, which he promptly used exclusively to play World of Warcraft for 18 hours a day. There was the brief, catastrophic foray into day trading where he lost a chunk of my parents' retirement savings, only to be comforted by my mother, who blamed the unpredictable market rather than her son's complete lack of financial literacy. Through all of this, Kyle never held down a real job for more than 3 months. Whenever a manager asked him to show up on time or do actual work, Kyle would quit, citing a toxic work environment, and my parents would welcome him back to the couch with open arms and a hot plate of pizza rolls. I, on the other hand, moved out the day after I graduated high school. I took out student loans, I worked night shifts as a waitress, I lived in apartments so small and decrepit that I could touch both walls of my bedroom at the same time. I clawed my way through a finance degree, landed a grueling entry-level corporate job, and slowly, painstakingly built a comfortable, secure life for myself. I didn't ask my parents for a penny, and they didn't offer. In their eyes, I was the strong one, which was simply their convenient, guilt-free way of saying, the one we don't have to worry about or spend money on. I had long ago made my peace with this dynamic. I kept my distance, visited on major holidays, endured the inevitable conversations where my mother praised Kyle's newest imaginary venture, and went back to my peaceful, independent life. But everything changed 4 years ago, when I was 25. My paternal grandmother passed away. She was a complicated woman, a hoarder who had lived alone for 20 years in a small, 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom house on the outskirts of the city. When she died, the property was left entirely to my father. Now, when I say property, please do not picture a quaint, charming fixer-upper. Picture a biological hazard. The house had been neglected for decades. The roof had severe leaks, leading to a catastrophic black mold infestation in the ceiling and walls. The floors were warped and rotting, covered in decades-old carpet that reeked of feral cats and decay. The plumbing was completely shot, the electrical wiring was a massive fire hazard from the 1950s, and the yard looked like a post-apocalyptic jungle. The house was, by all objective metrics, a teardown. My parents, who were already struggling financially due to decades of subsidizing Kyle's existence, realized they couldn't afford the property taxes on the house, nor could they afford the massive demolition costs required to clear the lot and sell the land. They were desperate to get rid of it. That's when my mother, in a rare stroke of manipulative genius, called me with an amazing proposition. "Maya, sweetheart," she had cooed over the phone, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Your father and I have been talking. We know how hard you work, and we know you've been saving up to try and buy a small condo. We want to do something incredibly special for you. We want to gift you Grandma's house." Free and clear. I was immediately suspicious. My parents didn't gift me things. If they bought me a $20 sweater for Christmas, I was expected to express boundless gratitude for 6 months. A house? There was a massive catch. Mom, Grandma's house is condemned, I pointed out flatly. It has black mold. The roof is collapsing. It needs $100,000 just to make it legally habitable. Oh, you're exaggerating, she scoffed, waving away my very real structural concerns. It just needs a little elbow grease, some paint, maybe pull up the carpets. You're so handy and hardworking, Maya. It's a completely free house. It's an investment in your future. Kyle doesn't want it. He says he needs to stay closer to the city center for his networking. So your father and I decided you should have it. I went to look at the house. It was worse than I remembered. Stepping through the front door required a respirator mask. The smell of cat urine and damp rot hit me like a physical punch. But as I walked through the debris-filled rooms, shining a flashlight into the gloom, my analytical brain started working. The lot itself was actually quite large, almost half an acre, located in a neighborhood that was slowly beginning to gentrify. The foundation of the house, miraculously, was solid poured concrete and completely crack-free. The bones of the structure, the core framing, were thick, old-growth timber that you simply couldn't buy anymore. If I stripped it down to the literal studs, if I ripped out every single piece of drywall, plumbing, and wire, it could be something. It would take every penny of my savings. It would take years of my life. It would be a grueling, soul-crushing amount of physical labor. But if I did it, I would own a detached home with a yard, something that was entirely out of reach for a single 25-year-old in my city's housing market. Okay, I told my parents the next day. I'll take it, but on one strict condition. The deed has to be transferred into my name immediately, 100% ownership. I am not putting a single dime or a single drop of sweat into that property until I have the legal title in my hands, registered with the county. My father seemed slightly offended. Maya, we're your parents. You think we'd trick you? I replied carefully, looking directly into my father's eyes, that if I turn this toxic dump into a livable house, I need to know it is legally mine to keep or sell. No strings attached. You transfer the deed, I take on the liability of the mold and the rotting roof. They agreed. They were just thrilled to be rid of the tax burden and the municipal fines that were starting to pile up due to the overgrown yard. We went to a real estate attorney. The paperwork was drawn up, signed, and filed. The deed to 442 Elm Street was officially, legally, undeniably transferred to Maya Jenkins. I paid the transfer taxes, I paid the recording fees, and I became a homeowner. That was 4 years ago. The next 3.5 years were a blur of absolute, unmitigated exhaustion. I moved out of my rented apartment and bought a used, insulated camper trailer, which I parked in the overgrown backyard of the property. For almost 2 years, I lived in that tiny trailer, showering at a local cheap gym, working my intense 50-hour-a-week corporate job during the day, and then coming home to work until midnight on the house. I couldn't afford to hire a general contractor to do everything, so I became my own. I hired professionals for the dangerous stuff, the complete rewiring of the electrical system, the installation of a brand new HVAC unit, and the rough-in plumbing. But everything else, I learned how to do it myself. I spent countless weekends in a Tyvek suit and a P100 respirator, hauling hundreds of heavy contractor bags filled with moldy, cat urine-soaked carpet, rotting drywall, and ruined insulation to a rented dumpster. I learned how to hang and mud drywall by watching hundreds of hours of YouTube tutorials. My hands were perpetually blistered, covered in calluses, cuts, and joint compound. My social life completely evaporated. While my peers were going out for brunch and traveling to Mexico, I was meticulously learning how to lay self-leveling concrete. I was carefully calculating the square footage of porcelain tiles I needed. I was eating cheap instant ramen and peanut butter sandwiches because every single extra dollar from my paycheck went directly to buying lumber, insulation, paint, and fixtures. Slowly, agonizingly, the house transformed. And because I was saving so much money on labor by doing the finishing work myself, I could afford to put in high-end materials. I didn't just build a habitable house, I built my absolute dream home. I vaulted the ceilings in the main living area, exposing the beautiful original beams and staining them a rich, dark walnut. I installed wide plank, engineered white oak flooring throughout the entire house. The kitchen, which used to be a cramped, greasy nightmare, was opened up to feature custom navy blue shaker cabinets, gleaming white quartz countertops with subtle gray veining, a massive farmhouse sink, and top-of-the-line stainless steel appliances. I completely redesigned the bathroom, turning it into a spa-like retreat with a massive walk-in shower featuring floor-to-ceiling emerald green subway tile, brushed brass fixtures, and a rainfall shower head. I landscaped the yard myself, tearing out the dead brambles, planting hydrangeas, laying fresh sod, and building a beautiful cedar deck off the back door, complete with a fire pit area. By the time I was 28, the house was finished. It was a masterpiece. It looked like a spread out of Architectural Digest. The property values in the neighborhood had skyrocketed during those 3 years, and an appraiser, whom I hired to reassess the property for insurance purposes, informed me that my home was now worth nearly 5 times what the land had originally been valued at. I had immense, hard-earned equity. I had no mortgage. I had done it. I finally moved out of the camper trailer, sold it, and slept in my gorgeous, pristine, luxurious primary bedroom. During this entire 3.5-year renovation process, my family's involvement was exactly zero. My parents visited the property exactly once, during the demolition phase, complained about the dust and the smell, and never returned. Kyle never even asked about it. They were perfectly content to let me struggle, bleed, and exhaust myself in isolation. Until, of course, the house was finished. I made the monumental mistake of hosting Thanksgiving dinner last year. I wanted to show off my hard work. I was proud. I spent 3 days cooking, preparing a beautiful turkey, making artisan pies, and setting a gorgeous table in my new, expansive dining area. When my parents and Kyle arrived, the reaction was instantaneous, and it was deeply unsettling. They didn't walk in and say, "Wow, Maya, you did an incredible job." They didn't say, "We are so proud of your hard work." Instead, my mother walked through the front door, stopped dead in her tracks on the white oak floors, and her jaw dropped. But it wasn't a look of pride. It was a look of pure, unadulterated calculation. Her eyes darted around the vaulted ceilings, the quartz countertops, the expensive light fixtures. Kyle, who was currently between opportunities again and had recently put on about 40 pounds from sitting on his gaming chair, waddled into the kitchen, ran his hand over the smooth stone counters, and muttered, "Damn. Grandma's house looks like a rich person's house now. You got a nice setup here, Maya. This TV is huge." Throughout the entire dinner, the atmosphere was incredibly tense. My parents kept asking incredibly invasive questions. How much did those cabinets cost? What is this house appraised for now? Are you sure you need all this space just for one person? I deflected the questions, trying to keep the conversation light, but a cold knot of dread began to form in my stomach. I knew my parents. I knew that look in my mother's eyes. It was the look she got right before she asked for something she felt entirely entitled to. The hammer didn't drop at Thanksgiving, though. They bided their time. The real nightmare began 6 months later, in late May of this year. Kyle, predictably, had hit rock bottom yet again. His latest girlfriend, a lovely nurse who had been foolishly paying all his bills for the last 2 years, finally woke up, realized she was dating a giant man baby, and kicked him out of her apartment. Kyle was officially homeless, completely broke, and had absolutely nowhere to go. Naturally, he moved back into my parents' house. But my parents had recently downsized to a much smaller townhouse, planning for their retirement. Having a massive, loud, messy 35-year-old man taking over their small living room, eating all their food, and playing video games at maximum volume until 4 a.m. quickly shattered their peaceful retirement dream. They were miserable. They needed Kyle out. But Kyle couldn't afford a cardboard box, let alone rent in our city. That is when they hatched their brilliant, deranged, absolutely psychopathic plan. It was a Tuesday evening. I had just gotten home from work, kicked off my heels, and poured myself a glass of expensive red wine, ready to relax on my beautiful velvet sofa. The doorbell rang. I checked my Ring camera. It was my parents. Just the two of them. No Kyle. I opened the door, a sudden wave of apprehension washing over me. Mom, Dad, what are you doing here? Is everything okay? We need to talk, Maya, my father said gravely, pushing past me into the house without waiting for an invitation. My mother followed, her face set in a mask of grim determination. They sat down at my kitchen island. I remained standing, gripping my wine glass. What's going on? My mother cleared her throat. Maya, we are in a desperate situation. You know Kyle's situation. Stephanie threw him out. He has absolutely nothing. He's incredibly depressed. Being cramped in our small townhouse is destroying his mental health. He needs a fresh start. He needs a stable foundation, so he can finally get his life together. Okay, I said cautiously. I'm sorry to hear that. What does that have to do with me? My father leaned forward, clasping his hands together. Maya, we've been thinking a lot about this property, about Grandma's house. We gave this to you when you were just starting out, to help you get on your feet. Gave this to me. My blood pressure began to spike. You gave me a condemned biohazard that I spent nearly 4 years and all of my life savings turning into a home, Dad. My mother waved her hand dismissively, an incredibly irritating gesture she used when she wanted to ignore reality. Yes, you did some very nice decorating, Maya. We acknowledge that. But the fact remains, we gifted you this property. And right now, Kyle needs it much more than you do. I froze. The room suddenly felt very cold. I stared at my mother, waiting for the punchline, waiting for her to laugh and say it was a terrible joke. But her eyes were dead serious. I'm sorry, what exactly are you saying? We want you to move out, my father stated, his voice completely level, as if he were asking me to pass the salt. We want you to let Kyle have the house. You have a great job, Maya. You make a fantastic salary. You have incredible credit. You can easily afford to go rent a nice luxury apartment downtown, closer to your office. Kyle has nothing. This house was originally family property anyway, and it's only fair that your brother gets a share of his grandmother's legacy. I was so profoundly stunned by the sheer, unadulterated entitlement that for a full 30 seconds, I literally could not speak. I just stared at them. I looked at the dark walnut beams I had stained myself, breathing in fumes for days. I looked at the kitchen island I was leaning against, remembering how I had almost broken my foot dropping a slab of quartz. I thought of the years of freezing winters in the camper trailer. Are you out of your completely collective minds? I finally whispered, the words trembling with a rage so hot it burned my throat. Maya, don't be selfish. My mother snapped, her facade of desperation instantly dropping into hostility. You have always been so greedy. We gave you a free house, a free piece of land. You've lived here rent-free for years. It is Kyle's turn. He is your brother, he is family. He is struggling and you are sitting here in this mansion all by yourself. It's excessive, it's greedy. I am not selfish, you insane woman. I exploded, slamming my wine glass down on the counter so hard the stem almost snapped. You didn't give me a house. You dumped a toxic financial liability onto a 25-year-old because you were too cheap to pay for demolition. I rebuilt this house with my own bare hands. My money, my blood, my sweat. It is in my name. Legally, 100% mine. Kyle is not moving in here. Kyle is not stepping foot on this property. I will burn this house to the ground before I let that lazy, entitled parasite live in it. The argument escalated into a full-blown screaming match. My father tried to physically intimidate me, puffing out his chest and stepping into my personal space, telling me I was a disrespectful, ungrateful brat, and that I owed them for raising me. My mother started fake crying, wailing about how I was tearing the family apart, how I hated my brother, how I was a cold, heartless corporate monster. I didn't back down an inch. I pulled out my phone, dialed 911, and held my thumb over the call button. Get out of my house, I said, my voice dropping to a deadly, icy whisper. Get out of my house right now, or I am calling the police and having you trespassed. And if you or Kyle ever come onto my property again, I will have you arrested. They left, but not before my mother screamed from the porch that I was dead to her, and my father spat on my brand new cedar deck. For the next 3 weeks it was radio silence. No texts, no calls. I breathed a sigh of relief. I assumed, somewhat naively, that my threat to call the police had shocked them back into reality. I assumed that, despite their insane entitlement, they understood the legal reality that the house was in my name, and they had absolutely no power to force me out. I severely underestimated the depths of their delusion and the extent of their desperation to get Kyle off their couch. In mid-June, I had a massive, week-long corporate conference to attend in Chicago. It was a mandatory business trip. I had mentioned this trip to my mother months ago, back in February, before the great Thanksgiving house envy incident, when we still had a somewhat normal, LC, low-contact relationship. I hadn't thought about it since, but she remembered. She remembered the exact dates. Before I left for Chicago, I did what any responsible homeowner does. I checked my security systems. I had a comprehensive ring system, a doorbell camera, a camera over the driveway, and a camera watching the backyard. I also had a very nosy, very sweet 70-year-old neighbor named Mrs. Gable, who lived across the street. Mrs. Gable sat on her front porch all day, knitting and watching the neighborhood like a hawk. I went over, gave her a box of expensive chocolates, told her I would be in Chicago for 7 days, and asked her to keep an eye on the place. I didn't mention the drama with my family, I just asked her to watch for any strange cars. I flew to Chicago on a Sunday morning. The conference was exhausting. By Wednesday, I was completely drained, surviving on stale hotel coffee and endless networking events. On Wednesday afternoon, at precisely 2:15 p.m., my phone buzzed in my pocket during a keynote speech. It was a motion alert from my Ring app. Specifically, the driveway camera. I discreetly pulled my phone out under the table and opened the app. What I saw on that live feed made the blood completely drain from my face. My heart stopped in my chest, and then immediately began to hammer furiously. A large, rented U-Haul box truck was backed directly into my driveway, crushing the edges of my pristine hydrangeas. The back door of the truck was rolled up. Walking down the ramp of the U-Haul, carrying a disgusting, heavily stained mattress, was my father and my brother, Kyle. My mother was standing on my front porch, holding a shiny new brass doorknob in her hand, talking to a man in a work shirt who was currently drilling into my front door. They had hired a locksmith. My mind raced, trying to process the absolute, brazen criminality of what I was witnessing. They knew I was in Chicago. They had waited until they knew the house would be empty for days. They had hired a locksmith, probably lying and saying it was their house or that their daughter had locked herself out. They were changing the locks on my front door, and they were actively moving Kyle's pathetic, trashy belongings into my luxury home. They weren't just demanding the house anymore. They were stealing it. They firmly believed that possession is 9/10 of the law. They thought that if they got Kyle's stuff inside, if they changed the locks, I would come home on Sunday, be faced with a locked door and a squatter brother, and I would simply, cry, give up, accept defeat because they were family. I didn't cry, I didn't panic. A terrifying, absolute calmness washed over me. It was the icy clarity of pure, unadulterated vengeance. I stood up, silently excused myself from the conference room, and walked out into the quiet, carpeted hallway of the hotel. I didn't call my mother. I didn't call my father. Calling them would give them a chance to argue, to justify, to try and manipulate the situation. Instead, I dialed the non-emergency number for the police precinct located 3 blocks from my house in my home city. "Dispatch, Officer Reynolds speaking," a gruff voice answered. "Hello," I said, my voice perfectly steady, perfectly clear. "I need to report a burglary in progress at my primary residence. The address is 442 Elm Street. I am currently out of state on a business trip, but I am watching 3 individuals breaking into my home via a live security camera feed. They have hired a locksmith to drill out my locks, and they are currently moving unauthorized items into my property." The dispatcher's tone instantly sharpened. "Okay, ma'am. Are these individuals known to you?" This was the crucial moment. If I said, "Yes, it's my parents and brother," the police might write it off as a civil dispute or a family matter and refuse to intervene immediately. I knew exactly how to phrase it. "I recognize them as estranged relatives," I said formally. "However, let me be explicitly clear, they have absolutely no legal right to be on the premises. The property is 100% in my name solely. There is no lease, they do not live there. They have been explicitly, verbally told they are not allowed on the property. They are breaking and entering, committing burglary and trespassing. I want officers dispatched immediately, and I want full charges pressed for breaking and entering, destruction of property regarding the locks, and trespassing. Understood, ma'am. Units are being dispatched right now. Please stay on the line and keep monitoring the camera. I leaned against the wall of the hotel corridor, watching my phone screen with the intensity of a sniper. The audio on the camera was crystal clear. I watched as the locksmith finished installing the new lock, handed my mother a set of keys, and drove away. I made a mental note to sue his company later for failing to verify residency. I watched as my father and Kyle struggled to carry a hideous, torn, faux-leather sectional sofa up the steps and into my beautiful entryway, scraping the dark stain off my custom front door in the process. My mother was walking behind them, carrying boxes of Kyle's video games, acting like she was directing a professional move. "Careful with the walls, Kyle," my mother barked on the audio feed. "This is your new house now, you need to take care of it. We'll get her stuff packed up and put into the garage tomorrow." Her stuff? They were planning to pack my belongings, my clothes, my furniture, my life, and throw it in the dusty garage. The sheer delusion was breathtaking. 7 minutes later. 7 glorious, life-altering minutes later, the flashing red and blue lights painted my driveway. 2 police cruisers screeched to a halt in front of my house, blocking the U-Haul. 4 officers immediately jumped out, hands resting heavily on their duty belts, moving with tactical urgency. My mother, who had just walked out to grab another box from the truck, froze on the porch, a box of tangled computer cords slipping from her hands and crashing onto the cedar deck. "Police, step away from the vehicle, hands where I can see them," an officer shouted, advancing up the driveway. "What? No, no, officer, there's a misunderstanding," my mother shrieked, her voice hitting a dog whistle pitch of panic. "We're just moving my son in. This is our family home. Ma'am, step off the porch right now." My father and Kyle, hearing the commotion, stumbled out the front door. Kyle, holding a half-eaten bag of chips he had undoubtedly found in my pantry, looked like a deer caught in the headlights. "What the hell is going on?" my father bellowed, trying to sound authoritative. "We are moving our son into this house. Sir, we have a report from the verified legal homeowner of a burglary in progress," the lead officer stated, his tone brooking absolutely no argument. "The homeowner is watching you on camera right now and has stated you do not have permission to be here or to change the locks." I watched, holding my breath, as the reality of the situation crashed down upon my parents like a ton of bricks. My father's face turned a dangerous shade of purple. "The homeowner?" my father yelled, pointing a shaking finger at the house. "That's my daughter. She's a selfish little bitch who's trying to keep this house from her brother. We gave her this house. We have every right to be here." It was the dumbest possible thing he could have said to a police officer. He had just confessed, on body cam and my Ring audio, that he knew the house wasn't legally his, that it belonged to his daughter, and that he was doing this against her will. "Sir, unless your name is on the deed, you have no right to break the locks and enter the premises," the officer replied calmly. "I need everyone to turn around and place their hands on the back of the truck. Now. You can't arrest us. We're her parents," my mother wailed, finally bursting into genuine hysterical tears as an officer grabbed her wrist and firmly clicked a steel handcuff onto it. "I'm not going to jail," Kyle suddenly screamed, dropping his chips and actually trying to run back inside my house. He made it exactly 2 steps before an officer tackled him onto my pristine lawn, pressing his face into the grass. "Stop resisting. Put your hands behind your back." I stood in the hotel hallway in Chicago, thousands of miles away, watching on a 6-inch screen as my mother, my father, and my 35-year-old brother were simultaneously handcuffed, patted down, and shoved into the back of 2 separate police cruisers. My father was screaming obscenities about me, my mother was sobbing uncontrollably, and Kyle was whining that his shoulder hurt. "Ma'am," the dispatcher's voice crackled over my phone. "Are you still there? The suspects have been detained. Officers have secured the premises. There is some damage to your front door and unknown items inside. How do you wish to proceed?" I took a deep, shuddering breath. The adrenaline was slowly leaving my system, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I was done. I was so completely, permanently done. I want to press maximum charges on all three of them, I said firmly. Felony breaking and entering, burglary, vandalism for the door and the locks, trespassing. Everything you can possibly charge them with. I will be flying back tomorrow morning to give a formal statement and assess the damage. Under no circumstances are they to be released back to my property. Understood, ma'am. They are being transported to county holding now. I hung up the phone. I walked back into the conference room, sat down, and calmly finished taking notes on corporate synergy. The aftermath was a glorious, chaotic inferno of legal justice. I flew back to my city the next day. I walked into my house, accompanied by a police officer, to assess the damage. They had managed to drag Kyle's filthy couch into my living room, scratching my beautiful oak floors in the process. They had also brought in several boxes of literal trash, old clothes, empty energy drink cans, unwashed bedding. It smelled awful. I documented everything. I took hundreds of photos. I hired a specialized biohazard cleaning crew to remove Kyle's belongings, refusing to touch them myself, and had the couch and boxes dumped at the local landfill. I hired a premium wood floor restorer to fix the deep gouges they had left in the oak. I bought the most expensive, high-tech, reinforced steel security door on the market to replace the one they had ruined. The total cost for the new door, the emergency locksmith to regain entry, the floor repair, and the junk removal came to nearly $8,500. My parents and Kyle spent 3 agonizing days in the county jail before a judge granted them bail. They couldn't afford the bail themselves. They had spent all their liquid cash renting the U-Haul and hiring the illegal locksmith. They had to beg my mother's sister, my aunt, to post their bond. When they finally got their phones back, my voicemail box filled up within an hour. There were sobbing apologies from my mother, furious, spittle-flecked threats from my father, and pathetic whining from Kyle. They demanded I drop the charges. They claimed their lives were ruined. They said I was a monster for giving my own family criminal records. I didn't answer a single call. I forwarded every single voicemail directly to the prosecuting attorney handling their case. Because they had literally documented their own crime on my security cameras, and because my father had loudly confessed his motives to the arresting officers, the criminal case was a slam dunk. My parents, terrified of facing actual prison time at their age, accepted a brutal plea deal. They pled guilty to felony trespassing and misdemeanor destruction of property. They were given 3 years of strict probation, mandated to perform 500 hours of community service, which, hilariously, involves cleaning up garbage along the highway in neon vests, and were issued a permanent, legally binding restraining order requiring them to stay 500 feet away from me and my property at all times. Kyle, who already had a minor record